Okay, we're calling this meeting back to order. And we are at a delegation. We are late. I'm not happy about that. We have BC Hydro here to present to us regarding Bridge River System Capital Project update.
Thank you. Sorry, just a couple of seconds loading. There we go.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for having us today. My name is Dana, and I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Advisor with BC Hydro, and I'm joined by my colleague, Chris Hatton, who is the Project Manager for Dam Safety and Programs. And today we'll be providing an update on BC Hydro's capital project plan in the Bridge River area. And with that, I'll pass it over to Chris to take us through the update.
Perfect. Thanks, Dana. And just because we just got on here, I want to make sure folks can see me. Can somebody give me or hear me? Sorry, somebody can give me a thumbs up. I'm seeing. Awesome. All right. Thanks for having me. As Dana mentioned, I'm a project manager with BC Hydro. Worked in the region for a number of years, and maybe we'll just dive right in. I know I've got a short period of time here, folks, so I may go a bit quick. Please forgive me, and I'm happy to revisit any of the slides if there's any specific questions when we get to the end here. So we'll go to the next slide here, and maybe there we go, to the agenda. So really quickly, we'll refamiliarize folks with the Bridge River system from BC Hydro's perspective. I'll give a rundown of kind of where we are at with a number of projects. So that'll be the quick part. Really touch on, our First Nations ongoing First Nations consultation. I'll also speak a little bit about our access and accommodation with these large capital projects that we're bringing in, and some of the work that we've done that some of you may have seen around the access and accommodation studies. And then Dana will kind of follow up on how we will move forward on any kind of further communications. So we'll go to the next slide, please. Again, so really quickly for folks, again, I would imagine you are all relatively familiar with a map like this, but BC Hydro has essentially, the Bridge River system is made up of 3 reservoirs: the Dowden Reservoir, Carpenter Reservoir, and Seton Lake and Anderson Lake. And 4 facilities, so the LaJoy Dam and Powerhouse, the Tozagi Dam, which is a diversion facility, our Bridge River 1 and 2 powerhouses, and then our Seton Dam and Powerhouse just in Lillooet there. Next slide, please. There we go. So starting at Seton, some of you may be familiar with the bypass project. I think you've been briefed on this before. Again, this is a water conveyance reliability project, really. Seton being the bottom of our system, the last discharge facility. It's the bottleneck, and we want to make sure that if and when we need to be doing some major upgrades or work on that facility, particularly on the powerhouse, we can prevent the need to do large spills down the Seton River. And so the bypass project would allow BC Hydro to safely convey water over a prolonged period of time. That work is ongoing. The project is kind of has finalized their preliminary design, and working towards a BCUC submittal later next year, and targeting to have construction starting into 2026 and major construction in 27, and being all wrapped up there by 2029. We'll go to the next slide, please. Again, so for folks that aren't familiar, that is kind of the arrangement. The bypass, that red dotted line, would essentially go around the facility and allow us to still allow water to go down the canal and go into the tail race there of the facility while we're doing work on the generating units. The generating unit, excuse me, there's only one. So allows us to keep that water flowing. We can go to the next slide, please. So as I think I've already mentioned this, so we can probably skip this one. All the content in there I've kind of already spoken to us ongoing work on the project. Thanks. So if any of you have been in Lillooet over kind of the summer, you may have seen some work happening in and around the facility. A lot of that was exploratory work, or confirmation work for our designers. That's all been wrapped up. That was kind of through the summer into the fall here. And we do feel as though we're completed on that work. However, as projects progress, there's always, an opportunity to maybe get some more clarification. So we may be doing more work, but there's nothing in the plan right now, other than maybe tours and things like that, folks walking around. We did also do some work, we do have some work on the canal planned here and later next year, and to be kind of finalized in 2026. Next slide, please. Moving up to Goldbridge and the Joy facility. That project, again, I suspect you folks are pretty familiar with this and been briefed on it. Work is ongoing. As you can imagine, very large project. We do have a leading alternative. We do have to do a BCUC submission, so there's some work to be done there. But that work is ongoing, and the project is working towards getting that into construction as early as 2027. That could slip a little bit depending on how some of this work goes on, with a current target to get that completed by 2032. So a little ways off there. Next slide, please. So things that are ongoing. So lots of investigations. We do have a drilling program. Excuse me, a drilling program in place to confirm a lot of the assumptions that we're doing on the work for the design component. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the access and accommodation study we are expecting later in January of next year, so in about a month or so, to have that access and accommodation study released to you folks and to the public. Next slide, please. Bridge River 1 to 4. So for folks that aren't familiar with the Bridge River facilities, we have 2 powerhouses, Bridge 1 to 4, and then 5 to 8. Bridge 5 to 8, those units have been replaced. We are looking to get the Bridge 1 to 4 units replaced. That is again ongoing. Procurement activities are underway, and we are looking to get that actually starting construction in 2028. We have to manufacture all the components and things like that before that, so that's why there's a bit of a lag there. Next slide, please. Got more work going on. The 1 to 5, the 1 to 4 coating project is on schedule to start in 2026, so a little over a year, but a year and a half. So the team is working towards that. And then the Bridge 1 foundation upgrade project was successfully completed this year. And that was a fantastic project. Everything went very, very well. And yeah, so that one's been wrapped up. So we'll be able to move on to our recoating component of that project. Next slide, please. Terzaghi. So now we're kind of in the middle. So Terzaghi, we did just finish up the RFP for the main component of the spillway access improvement project. So that's to stabilize the rock above the spillway. That's been completed, and we're assessing the RFP, and we're on track for complete construction to start. Excuse me, in 2026. The low-level discharge reliability project, that one's in pretty early stages, and we are looking to get that one up and running, and it's on track for our target of completion of 2030. So there'll be a little bit of overlap between those two projects. Next slide, please. So the Bridge River transmission project, again, things are going relatively well. We do have our BCUC application that's going in early next year. And then we are kind of still looking towards a start of construction in 2026. And then there at the bottom, just kind of wrapping up, we did have, I don't have the up-to-date to this minute, but the T4 project, the transformer project at Bridge River, the substation, is on track, and I'm not sure if it's been done to this day, but we are very close and expect it to be done this month. Next slide, please. Okay, so nothing new for folks on this, but important for us as an organization, as a team, to really just confirm and refresh folks of our commitment to consultation and working in engagement with local First Nations, collaborating on all the projects that we're doing, finding opportunities to work together as we're, the majority, if not all, of our assets lie within traditional territories of Statlium First Nations. So just a refresher for folks and reiterating BC Hydro's commitment on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so into workforce. So some folks may be interested in this. I think you may have seen this as part of the Lillooet access and accommodation study that was released in September. So a couple of things I want to highlight on this. This is a collection of a whole bunch of projects, and as projects in general kind of are, they're going to be subject to adjustment. We're constantly refreshing this and monitoring this. But as projects progress, we can see some of these peaks and valleys kind of shift either up or down or left to right. But generally, this is what we're expecting to see in the region, with 2026 really being that ramp up of workforce that we're getting prepared for from an accommodation and from a movement of workers perspective. I think we've got another slide on access and accommodation. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Lillooet study has been released, and that is available on our website there. And the second bullet, with the La Joy access and accommodation study targeting end of January, early February to be released to the public as well. So just wrapping up that one as well. I don't think we're running short on time, so I won't dive into that too much, but happy to have more questions on that. Again, similar with this, we are engaging with local First Nations on both facilities, both La Joy and Lillooet, as well as looking at the hotel. And we're in constant discussions with Statlium on figuring out if we can make a hotel option work to support BC Hydro and as well to support that project. Next slide. I think that might be it for me. I think it's over to Dana for the communications.
Thanks, Chris. Great. So with all the capital project work that we have going on in the area, it's really important for us to make sure that we're keeping communities up to date with our plans as well as ongoing activities. And some of the ways that we're doing that is through local ads. So that could be local paper or online ads. We do open houses and virtual presentations, delegations like this one. We also have a biannual Bridge River newsletter that keeps everyone in the loop with all the activities that we have going on in the Bridge River area. You can also find all of our information online at our website, bchydro.com/bridgeriver. And if you have questions or would like to reach out to us for more information, you can email us at projects@bchydro.com or give us a call at 1-866-647-3334. And with that, that wraps up our presentation. We'd be happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you. We only have a couple minutes, so go ahead, Director Birch-Jones.
Thank you. I think you guys are doing a wonderful job with outreach. I'm the Area B Director, and I live kind of just across the river from the Seaton bypass, and I'm watching that with interest. My question is to do with the salmon that are coming up the Fraser. And you likely know, this is probably more a question for Chris, and possibly you've already talked to BFO and First Nations about it, that those salmon waste time at that tail race, confused by the Seaton water before they find the Seaton River upstream. And with this bypass, is there going to be sort of more water flowing out there? Is it going to be kind of compounding the problem that the beleaguered salmon already have there? Are you taking that into consideration? I hope you are.
No, absolutely. I'm happy to give you kind of I'm not an expert on the subject, but I can speak. I was actually on that project for a number of years. The operations target for the bypass is we wouldn't use the two at the same time. So we wouldn't be increasing the amount of water that would be going down. The bypass is there so that we can release water, probably less water than we would through a generator, but it's really to manage the overall water levels in the reservoir over a longer period of time. So I wouldn't expect that to be a compounding issue. It would be a like for like almost swap, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, one of your slides illustrates the worker conduct requirements. You've been going for a few years now. I just wonder, have you had any issues at all with conflict between the workforce and the local residents?
I'm not an expert, and I'm not the day-to-day operator of the relationships there. And I think, Dana or I could check with our team. Anecdotally, I can say, I'm not going to pretend that it's been flawless. Whenever you have groups of people together, there's always going to be rub points. The general feedback that I've heard from the team is it's generally quite good. The behaviors are quite good. The relationships are quite good. And the workers are respectful, and BC Hydro and our construction management team are very adamant and constantly are reminding and working with our contractors to make sure that they understand and reflect BC Hydro's values. So overall, I think it's been a good news story from my understanding.
One other quick question. There's a slide there, the penstock sitting above ground. Where is it? Yeah. With the one about the internal recoding project. I'm just looking at that sort of stretching along there. Did you pay any attention at all to wildlife corridors or wildlife access through there?
I don't have a straight answer for you on that one. I'm familiar with the site. I know it's been there for a number of years, and I haven't heard of issues with obstructing wildlife. Again, anecdotally, I can say I have scrambled around that slope. I'm a big guy, and I haven't had trouble getting out. There is lots of space underneath that penstock. So I'm not familiar of any issues that we've had with wildlife and making it around the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you both for being here today. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you very much.
Well, we'll go to Alex's report because she's 10 minutes behind. You're not 10 minutes behind, we're 10 minutes behind.
We should all gang up like this all the time.
So we are moving ahead in the agenda for the sake of everyone watching and those in this room. We're moving to 9.2, a request for decision regarding the SLRD housing need and demand study. And we have Ms. Dewar and Mackay. Thank you, Ms. Mackay. It's because I haven't seen you in person in so many months. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. So Alex Mackay, planner with the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. This is agenda item 9.2. As Chair Ford mentioned, it's on page 607 of your agenda package. I'm going to give a very quick introduction to the project, but the bulk of the presentation will be the consultants this afternoon. So as a result of the 2023 amendments to the Local Government Act, changes were made to the timing and requirements for housing needs reports, and regional districts are now required to prepare an interim housing needs report by no later than January 1st of 2025. So this work that will be presented to you this afternoon meets that legislative requirement. I just want to briefly touch on, because it's not going to be part of the consultant presentation, that there was a number of another number of community engagement activities that we did as part of this project. We had a virtual community survey from September 18th to October 18th. So earlier this year, we had a virtual open house. We had relatively low attendance at the open house. We had about 5 members of the public. So what we decided to do along with the consultants following the open house was to pivot and do interest group interviews with a number of nonprofits, realtors and developers working in the region so that we had coverage from all of the electoral areas. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention is that while municipalities are required to update their bylaws, so their official community plans and zoning bylaws in accordance with their housing need and demand studies, regional districts are exempt from that requirement. But we will, of course, be taking the findings of the study into account as we're working on OCP and zoning bylaw updates in the future. So with that, I'll leave it there and I'll turn it over to Matt Thompson and Jesse Abraham on screen to run you through the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today. My name is Matt Thompson. I'm with Urban Matters and with my colleague Jesse. Jesse's going to lead us in this presentation, and I'll be jumping in to provide speaking notes in in a little bit on some of the later slides. So Jesse, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Matt, and thank you, Alex, for the introductions as well. I'll get us going here to the next slide. Okay, so the first SLRD housing need and demand study was drafted in 2020 as per provincial legislation for housing needs reports. The report presented data and trends that describes current and future housing needs by region and by electoral areas. As Alex mentioned, since this first report was published in late 2023, the provincial government updated housing need report requirements and mandated that local governments complete an interim or updated housing needs report, which includes 5 and 20-year housing needs and additional statements of needs as well. So this 2024 housing need and demand study update will compare data from that 2020 report and identify updated trends in housing needs. So the data used for these reports are from several sources, including Statistics Canada, BC Stats, CMHC, BC Assessment, among other sources. One thing to note is that census information regarding the SLRD includes data from member municipalities as well as electoral areas. Next slide. Okay, so report content overview. So the final report is presented with the following sections, starting with current community context, including historical and demographic data, housing context, including stock and affordability, anticipated housing needs, including 5 and 20-year housing demand, and lastly, next steps and policy recommendations. So starting with the community data, the graph here shows the population over the last 4 census periods dating back to 2006 and broken out into electoral areas. We've also included on this graph the growth rate between the last 2 census periods between 2016 and 2021 to demonstrate recent population growth. So area A, shown in blue at the bottom of the graph, has the lowest population, but has seen the greatest growth in the last census period, increasing by 63% up to 305 people in 2021. Area B, shown in yellow, has seen minimal population growth with 373 people in 2021. Area C has the highest population. You can see at the top of the graph at 20% up to 2,000 people in 2021. And lastly, area D in light blue shows the same population between the 2 census periods, ending with 1,057 people in 2021. In comparison, the population of the region overall between 2016 and 21 grew by 18%. This is high compared to the provincial average of 7%. Age. So this slide shows the population broken down into age groups for each electoral area and for the region overall. A few notable points. Area A has the greatest proportion of seniors aged 65 and older at 31%. Area C has the greatest proportion of families, so 20% of the population is 19 or younger. This is comparable to the region, which is made up of 21% of children 19 and under. We also look at median age, shown here by electoral area. So all the areas have a high median age, well above the regional median of 38 years old, demonstrating the older adult populations living in these areas. Households. So here we show number of households over the last 4 census periods and by electoral area. This is the number of private dwellings occupied by usual residents. So area A, shown at the beginning of the graph, remained consistent until 2016, after which time households increased from 115 to 170 households. Area B seems to decline over time, showing 260 in 2006 and decreasing to 165 households in 2021. Area C has the greatest number of households, but saw a decline in 2016 and increasing again to 815 households in 2021. Area D has seen a slow increase with 450 households in 2021. And then looking at households by tenure, regionally, the SLRD is composed of 65% owner households and 31% renter households and 3% band housing. So you can see in the graph, tenure is dominated by owner households shown in blue across electoral areas, making up 71 to 100% of total households in each area. Looking at median income by tenure, The blue shows median income by owner households, and then the yellow shows median income by renter households. So note that for this graph, Area A renter household income is suppressed, so nothing's shown here due to low sample size. Areas A and B have lower median incomes at approximately 50 to 60,000 per household. Owner incomes in areas C and D are notably higher at 102,000 and 108,000 per household annually. Renter incomes in area C are 54,000 per year and in area D are 108,000 per year, same as owner households. So compared to the region overall, median incomes are generally lower in the electoral areas. Housing stock. Dwellings by structure type are occupied dwellings only in terms of data. There could be existing forms that were not occupied during COVID when the last census survey took place and are now occupied and vice versa. The largest proportion of dwellings in all electoral areas are single detached houses, ranging from 79 to 88% of the housing stock. You'll also see on the graph, we have what we're calling other attached dwellings. This refers to semi-detached houses, secondary suites, row houses, and apartment buildings. Movable dwellings include mobile homes and other movable dwellings such as houseboats, recreational vehicles, and railroad cars. Although it is not captured in the data, possibly due to small population size, data suppression, or rounding, we just want to note that movable dwellings do exist in Area A as well. Okay, so looking at development trends, this is the number of building permit and demolition permits issued over the last 10 years between 2014 to date. So notably, Area C has seen the greatest amount of new development with 156 total new units, followed by Area D at 75 total new units. Specifically in new single detached houses, which are shown in blue, and followed by homes with suites shown in yellow. Area D was the only area with new multifamily units, so 22 new units, and this includes townhouses. So next, we get into average owner shelter costs. So this is some of the ownership data. Shelter costs include mortgage, insurance, utilities, and property taxes. So this data shown here is from 2021 census. The yellow shows shelter costs from 2016. Notably, Area D has the highest average owner shelter costs of $2,540 per month, which is higher than the region of $2,050 per month. So owner shelter costs have noticeably increased over the 5-year period across the board. One thing to note as well is we want to acknowledge that these costs have likely changed significantly since the data was collected in 2020 and published in 2021 due to inflation, interest rates, and other factors. So something to keep in mind as we review the costs. These next slides look at average assessed home values. So in yellow is 2019 BC assessment data. So this was included in the last housing needs report, and blue is the most recent 2023 BC assessment data. So this graph is for Area A. Average single family value is approximately $430,000 and down to $244,000 for a manufactured home. Moving into Area B, home values are similar to Area A. Again, average single family home is assessed at approximately $430,000 in 2023, and a manufactured home is assessed at $226,000. You can see the increases over the 4-year period as well. Area C, we start to see notable differences. So a single family home was at $1.3 million in 2023, followed by an average house with suite at $2.6 million, with steep escalations from 2019 values. We also see different housing types such as duplex, triplex, fourplex for approximately $1.5 million. Manufactured homes cost over $500,000 and seasonal dwellings average at approximately $400,000. Area D has the highest single family assessed value at $1.5 million in 2023. So duplex, triplex, and fourplex increased to $1.9 million. Row and townhouses are also available in this area and are assessed at an average of $1.7 million. One thing to note, new construction can have higher sale prices than older construction, which may explain why multifamily units have higher values than single-family dwellings, which likely make up the older housing stock. So with that information in mind, the following table pulls together all the owner information and prices that we just reviewed. So this is an affordability analysis broken into electoral areas and housing types. So for this analysis, we look at what types of housing a median income household could afford to own a property. So we make a number of assumptions, such as amounts for down payment and use of interest rates. We also adjusted incomes to 2024 incomes based on annual growth rate in income. So what is this table telling us? In Area A, a median income owner household earning $71,000 per year does not earn enough to purchase a single detached or seasonal dwelling. They can, however, afford a manufactured home. In Area B, a median income household is earning approximately $60,000 per year. They cannot afford a single family dwelling. In Area C, median income is $118,000. They cannot afford a single family dwelling or manufactured home, but can afford a seasonal dwelling. In Area D, the median income for owner households is $125,000, but this is below the level of affordability for any housing type. Overall, only manufactured homes and seasonal dwellings are considered affordable for median income owner households in any electoral area. Great. So similar to our slides on owner costs, we now look at average rent or shelter costs as collected in the last two census surveys. So Area D has the highest average cost at $2,800 per month to rent in 2021. This is substantially higher than the region overall at approximately $1,800. For this graph, we also included BC data to show the provincial average rent cost for comparison, which is just below $1,500 per month. We again want to acknowledge that these costs have likely changed significantly since the data was collected in 2020 due to inflation, interest rates, or other factors. So this table, similar to the owner affordability analysis, is now for renters. So you're trying to determine if a median income renter household can afford a rental unit average rates. So note that average rental costs and median income is based on 2021 census data. So average monthly shelter costs were projected to 2024 based on annual growth rates for rented dwellings, and then similar for median income data. So this table tells us in Area A, a median income household earns $54,000 per year and can afford the average rent costs. In areas B and C, a median income household earns $56,000 and $85,000, which is not enough to afford the average rental rates shown in red of $1,500 or $3,200 per month. The required income is shown in red. In areas D, the median income is noticeably higher at $118,000 per year, which means they can afford the average rental costs of $2,100 per month. Overall, for the SLRD as a region, rentals seem to meet the affordability levels as per the median income shown in the table here. Core housing need. So as a quick overview, CMHC uses a metric called core housing need to help understand how well housing needs are being met. So a household is considered to be in core housing need if it meets two criteria. First, a household is below one or more of the adequacy, suitability, and affordability standards. And two, the household would have to spend 30% or more of its before-tax household income to access local housing that meets all three standards. In addition, a household is considered an extreme core housing need if they meet this criteria and would have to spend 50% or more of its before-tax household income on housing. So the chart shown here specifically looks at owner households. So owner households in all electoral areas are experiencing high rates of core housing need, much higher than the region overall. 6% of owner households in Area C are experiencing extreme core housing need as well. We want to note that core housing need and housing indicated data published in 2021 was collected in 2020 during the first phase of the COVID pandemic when the federal government was distributing the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB. This means for a brief time, while those census surveys were completed, incomes may have been inflated, and data shown here may be lower than the true core housing need experienced in each community. Further, the economic circumstances have changed, as mentioned, and have been much more volatile, and many households have seen increases in home costs across the board. Great. So this next chart looks at renters in core and extreme core housing need. Just wanted to highlight 32% of renter households in Area C are in core housing need. So this is well above the regional rate of 19%. In addition, 2% of renter households in Area C are in extreme core housing need, and 14% of renter households in Area D are experiencing core housing need. Homelessness. So as per the 2021 provincial report on preventing and reducing homelessness, there are 131 people in the SLRD experiencing homelessness, including member municipalities. This data is based on individuals and families who receive income assistance and have no fixed address. It is very possible that this data does not include everyone, and numbers may have changed since this data was published in 2021 as well. And on that note, I'm going to pass it off to Matt to discuss anticipated housing needs.
Thanks, Jesse. So the next part of the presentation, and Jesse, I think, has presented some of the key trends based on changes between 2016 and 2021. One of the key requirements of this interim housing needs report legislation is a housing capacity assessment for 5 and 20-year housing need. This is the provincial requirement. This is prescribed and is consistent or the same for all municipalities and regional districts across the province. And so the same methodology is being applied regardless of whether you are, a small rural community or a large urban community. And so I'm going to spend the next couple of slides walking you through the methodology and some of the numbers that are emerging. So we can go to the next slide now. So as part of the overall work to make these housing needs reports consistent in their assessment of need, the province has developed a methodology which we sometimes refer to as the housing needs calculator, after the kind of automated online web portal that was developed to kind of produce the numbers and do it consistently across the province. But effectively, the province has identified a number of different areas of need and demand that consist of underlying need, that is the need that exists within our communities already, projected growth, and then additional demand based on market desire or market demand. So the first three components of this A, B, and C, you'll see are existing underlying need. And they can each be kind of traced to some components of the housing needs report overall. The first is extreme core housing need. So the province uses extreme core housing need as a proxy for households that are vulnerable enough that they need new forms of affordable housing. And so effectively what they've done is they've said, okay, for every renter in extreme core housing need, that is who's paying 50% or more of their income towards shelter costs, and for every owner that still has a mortgage that's in extreme core housing need, we're going to assume that we need affordable units in order to address that functional need. Component B is the slide that Jesse was discussing just a couple of slides ago, based on provincial analysis of homelessness at a regional level. And what they've done is they've taken this income assistance data for individuals with no fixed address, and they've been able to kind of produce figures on a regional basis at the regional district level. So for Metro Vancouver, for SLRD, for other regional districts. And then the methodology requires that be sort of spread out across the region on a per capita basis. So if your community, for example, represents 10% of the overall regional population, then you would be kind of ascribed or given 10% of the regional homeless population as part of your need to address within a community. This works relatively well, or sort of well, when it comes to municipalities. It's a little more challenging when it comes to the electoral areas and rural areas, because typically these rural areas are not don't have the services and housing to support that population. However, as we'll see on the next slide, that figure is relatively low for the electoral areas. Component C, we'll stay on that previous slide. Thank you. Component C is is what's known as supply to reduce suppressed household formation. So suppressed household formation is this notion that as our housing market has become more constrained, as we've seen lower vacancy rates, less available rental, increased cost of ownership, new households are not forming at the same rate that they used to historically. And so, for example, young people may not be leaving their parents' homes in order to rent for the first time, and renters may not be moving into the ownership market the way they would have done 15 or 20 years ago because of those constraints and affordability issues. And so component C is really looking at how are households forming in 2021, and how does that compare to how they would have formed, or the rates at which they would have formed in 2006. Component D is one of the more complex components of this because it is called supply to meet household growth, but I've been cautioning other communities that it's not necessarily a growth projection, where a growth projection would take historical trends of growth, births, deaths, in migration, out migration, and build a population line, and then develop a household formation trends off of that. Effectively, what this methodology does is it combines two different scenarios. The first is a local growth scenario, so based on BC stats, population, and household growth figures. But then it averages those with a regional household or a regional growth scenario. And so in the case of a regional district like SLRD, where you've got most of your growth taking place within your municipalities, what this effectively does for electoral areas is it kind of pulls their anticipated growth for this component up, because they're averaging their historical relatively low growth rates, particularly in areas A and B, with this higher regional growth rate, and they take the average of those two, and that's your supply to meet household growth. Now, I do really want to caution, I think that there's a bit of a or not necessarily misunderstanding, but one of the complexities of this is that means that component D is not necessarily a 20-year projection of growth. It is the province trying to say that you need to account for this potential growth. That doesn't mean it will happen, particularly when we know that most of the growth is taking place in the municipalities in SLRD. I also really want to caution that local governments are not necessarily going to be held to account for these levels of growth the way that they will be held to account for housing target, the way that we're seeing in Metro Vancouver and Southern Vancouver Island. So the housing targets are have some similarities in the methodology, although they're not a one-to-one. But the housing targets are the tool through which the province is kind of requiring growth for municipalities. This is just about creating capacity within the OCP for municipalities. And as Alex noted at the beginning of this presentation, regional districts in their electoral areas will not be required to do that same capacity planning for their OCPs based on this outcome. So it really is just intended to be kind of a standardization of the overall need assessment. The final two components of this, component E is relatively minor. It basically assumes that if there is new rental coming online through components A, B, C, and D, that there needs to be a bit of a rental buffer to ensure that vacancy rates come up to 3%, which is considered the bottom or the floor of what the healthy vacancy rate. Now, we don't actually have vacancy rates for the electoral areas in Squamish-Lillooet Regional District because that data is not available through CMHC. So the province requires, therefore, that we use provincial vacancy rates from 2021. That's a relatively minor overall part of the calculation. Then finally, component F is what they've called the demand buffer. And it's effectively a sort of an economic value based on housing price and housing density in every community in BC that's put on it to say how desirable, how much potential additional demand might there be in your community, because it's a nice place to live, because people may be sort of seeking, slightly less expensive places to live that have high quality of life. And so they've added this demand buffer on. And generally the way that it works is that for communities that have a very high cost of housing and a very low density, you'd anticipate seeing quite a high demand buffer. And for communities that have higher density and lower cost of housing, you would see a lower demand buffer. In general, I believe the demand buffer was relatively low for most of the electoral areas. But we can, yeah, in fact, it was, oh, sorry, I explained it and then just realized the demand buffer is only applied for municipalities, not for electoral areas. But it is to kind of create that additional room within the housing system. So we can move to the next slide now. Thank you. So overall, according to the provincial methodology, in order to meet anticipated need and demand over the next 20 years, there are anticipated to be about 12,500 new units required in the regional district as a whole. You can see that the large majority of those units are not in the electoral areas, which have quite small overall numbers, although you're seeing a need for 86 new units in area A, 111 in area B, 542 in area C, so certainly the most growth and underlying need anticipated, and 293 units in area D. So overall, you've got sitting at around 1,000 units of need in the electoral areas in comparison to about 12,500 across the region as a whole, including all the municipalities. So I think that's my explanation for this. Jesse, I'm going to hand it back over to you for the key statements of need.
Great, thanks, Matt. Okay, we can move into the next slide here. I'll review the key housing need areas, and then I'll pass it back to Matt to wrap up with the policy recommendations. So in this report, we summarize 7 key areas of need listed on the slide here. This is required as per legislative requirements by the province. The most recent regulations added in a new key area statement regarding housing in proximity to transit. So I will briefly review each key area. Essentially what it does is it pulls in the quantitative numbers and data with some of the qualitative information we received through engagement. Next slide, please. Great. So the first statement of need speaks to affordable housing. So housing pressures are high amongst households in the SLRD, with nearly 1,000 households experiencing core housing need in the electoral areas. So the provincial calculation estimates that about 32 new units of affordable housing are needed to address extreme core housing need in all 4 of the electoral areas, and about 10 units of housing to support individuals experiencing or at risk of homelessness, again, across the 4 electoral areas to address rural homelessness. Overall, housing costs have escalated across the region, and following an increase of remote workers and newcomers during the pandemic, there is an increased pressure on the existing housing stock. Engagement participants noted concerns that local incomes are diverging from affordable housing prices and that local workers are not able to attain housing. Further, community members are choosing to leave the community in search of more affordable housing. The next key area speaks to rental housing. So the need for rental housing in the SLRD varies from electoral area to area. If rates of rentership remain the same, each area needs the following new rental units. So 0 new rental units in area A, 23 new rental units in area B, 111 new rental units in area C, and 17 new rental units in area D. However, if affordability pressures continue to increase, it is likely that a higher number of rental units may need to be produced to accommodate a growing proportion of households that cannot afford to own. So these numbers should therefore be seen as a minimum number of required rental units. In the electoral areas, we heard from engagement participants, they reported very low availability of rental stock and that available rental units are difficult to find. So in addition, rental units in the electoral areas are secondary market rentals. This means residents are renting a home or suite from a homeowner and therefore feel insecure in their housing situation. Further, participants reported that those who cannot find rental housing resort to living in a travel trailer or recreational vehicle in order to stay in the community, a solution that is prohibited by SLRD bylaws. Businesses and employers are finding the lack of rental options to be the biggest barrier to recruiting new workers and maintaining employees in the region. Next key area speaks to special needs housing. So special needs housing refers to housing or housing supports for people with specialized needs, including people with physical and intellectual disabilities. So in the electoral areas, engagement participants identified the need for more accessible single-story housing options. Participants noted that community members who require supportive, transitional, or assisted living are required to relocate to Squamish or the Lower Mainland to access housing. And in both situations, wait lists are long. It is especially difficult to access housing supports if there's a sudden life change or crisis. Seniors housing. So in the demographic data, we learned that the electoral areas have a high proportion of aging and older populations, especially in the more isolated and remote areas of electoral area A and B. The median age for the region also indicates that municipalities are considerably younger than the rural areas of the region. This means there's a need for planning on several fronts to support aging in place for rural residents. So seniors housing options are typically not well supported through existing funding programs in rural areas, but health services to support aging in place can help seniors maintain independence as they age. This also indicates a need for seniors housing options in all the municipal centers to support seniors as they no longer can live independently. In response to the community survey, respondents noted that seniors without adequate at-home care and a lack of senior supportive housing were two of the top 5 issues in the region. Additionally, assisted living facilities were noted as one of the top 3 needed housing forms in the region. Seniors housing is increasingly important in terms of priority and regional need compared to responses received as part of the 2020 Housing Need and Demand Study. Next is family housing. So family housing requires larger housing units with more bedrooms and typically access to greener play space. So as housing costs have escalated, the proportion of renters has also increased, indicating a need for more affordable options in the region and more renter options for families. One way to provide increased affordability is through allowing more options for gentle density, particularly in higher growth areas such as areas C and D. Responses received through community engagement reinforce the need for multi-unit housing options for families, such as townhouses, which typically have a lower price point compared to single detached homes. Further, respondents highlighted the need for multi-generational housing options that allow multiple dwellings on one lot. Next is housing in proximity to transit. So housing in areas A and B is unlikely, even where close to communities such as Goldbridge, Braylorne, and the district of Lillooet, to be accessible by transit. However, housing in areas C and D may be better positioned given the proximity of Whistler and Squamish. Where affordable housing opportunities emerge in these areas, they would be best positioned to be located near transit that serves the municipalities where possible. Community engagement participants noted that the lack of public transit was the #1 current housing challenge in the region. Further, when survey respondents were asked what barriers they experienced when looking for their current home, respondents noted that housing options were too far from transit. And the last key area of need speaks to shelters and housing for people at risk of homelessness. So while the provincial calculation estimating homelessness does show the need for a small number of units to address homelessness in the electoral areas, it should be noted that municipalities are much better served to support this population. So with amenities, services, transit, and a greater range of housing choices, resources and supports to address homelessness tend to be located in municipalities. That said, rural homelessness still exists, often through precarious housing situations. So provincial data shows a need for approximately 10 units to address homelessness across the electoral areas and overall 131 units for the region, including a mix of both supportive and independent housing. So through engagement, it was noted that programs do exist for people who are experiencing homelessness or are in crisis, but they're very limited. So nonprofits offer rent supplements, but the funding is not enough to bridge the gap between affordability and market rents. Nonprofits also have programs for emergency or temporary housing in hotels, but funding is limited based on high local hotel rates, and accommodation is often unavailable during peak tourist season, and therefore the programs may have limited impact. And I will pass it off to Matt to wrap up policy recommendations.
Hey, thanks, Jessie. So the next few slides are on policy recommendations, which comprise the 5th part of the last chapter in the report. I do want to note that a lot of this work builds on recommendations from the previous report, which was completed in 2020. So our report kind of recognizes some of the work that's been done to date through the list of actions and kind of acknowledgement of planning work that staff have undertaken, and kind of continues with some of the same some recommendations in the same vein as the previous or 2020 report. So overall for the region, we identified that there are sort of 5 key policy areas that the regional district can focus on, including comprehensive planning efforts, increased collaboration and partnership between municipalities and nonprofit providers and even the private sector, continuing to explore land and servicing opportunities and opportunities for servicing partnerships, protecting opportunities to protect farming, and opportunities to explore innovative and complementary actions on housing. Next slide, please. For Area A, the focus is on reviewing housing policies related to Goldbridge and Braylorn to encourage the development of multifamily and affordable housing where appropriate, to focus on gentle density, but to continue to include OCP and zoning bylaw provisions to support duplexes or other forms of appropriate multifamily residential in proximity to community hubs. Updating the zoning bylaw to align with respective land use designations in the new OCP as the OCP gets wrapped, and considering possibilities to provide a revitalization grant for Goldbridge and Braylorn homes to encourage property owners to renovate and either rent or sell the homes. Next slide, please. For Area B, continuing to explore opportunities to support and collaborate with neighboring First Nations communities, community associations, and nonprofits to pursue BC housing funding opportunities. For example, the Community Housing Fund and Indigenous Housing Fund. To review the Area B OCP as part of a planned update and assess whether any comprehensive updates to housing objectives and policies are required, and if so, what those might look like. And then to update the zoning bylaw to align with the respective land use designations in the OCP as it's updated. Next slide. For Area C, support the development of a new mobile home park in the rural residential areas, continue to encourage the development of modest density multifamily housing in Mount Currie, and encourage development of modest density multifamily or seniors housing in Darcy. And if development is proposed, to engage with neighboring First Nations communities to explore opportunities for collaboration, to undertake a comprehensive OCP review to accommodate the higher demand for housing, particularly since this was the sort of highest assessed need of the 4 electoral areas, and to update the zoning bylaw to align with respective land use designations once the OCP has been updated. Next slide. And then finally, for Area D, to review housing-related OCP objectives and policies and determine if updates are needed to accommodate higher demand for housing, particularly in light of potential for growth there, and also to work to consider alignment between electoral Area D and the District of Squamish planning and land use, and then to update the zoning bylaw as needed to align with respective land use designations in the OCP. And that is all from us. So thank you very much for your time. We're certainly happy to take questions or comments at this point on the report.
Anyone have any questions? Director Crown.
Thanks for the report. I'm wondering what I see in each of your set of recommendations, you point to the OCPs. I'm wondering what the RGS says to those recommendations. Can people hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm wondering, I mean, in terms of the RGS, I know that work is being updated right now, and Claire has been, I mean, we've been chatting a little bit about that over the course of the project. But I know with those updates coming, I wonder if it might be more appropriate for staff to kind of comment on the link.
Sure, thank you. So through the chair, thank you for the question. My name is Claire Dewar. I'm a senior planner at the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. As part of our RGS review, we are adding a couple policy updates, strategic directions to the affordable housing goal, which speaks to collaborating on these housing needs reports as a region when possible. And so that would be really working with the municipalities to try and align both the timing and then potentially how the reports are structured. And then that would hopefully lead to the implementation of the policies that are coming out of that. And then the other strategic direction that is being included in the RGS review speaks to housing authorities and the role of the nonprofit housing and how we look to more regional approaches to collaborate both in the built form and then how we're managing those units. So those are what we are adding as part of the RGS review. And then, you know, more broadly, the regional growth strategy is still directing growth to member municipalities.
That was my question, when I saw a rural mobile home park, that seemed to move counter. Does it not move counter to the RGS? Through the chair?
Yeah, so through the chair, I think I think one project that I can highlight that was exciting to see move forward, that was a recommendation from the last housing need and demand study, was the Lillooet Main Street. So there are some pockets of opportunities in the SLRD, and we don't always know where they are without, you know, looking at each like site on a really site specific basis. That's why when we say generally the regional growth strategy is directing most like growth to our urban areas, we still do have pockets of these communities in the SLRD that may be able to accommodate some gentle density or some infill, or in the example of the Lillooet Main Street, we're seeing like a really exciting mixed use development.
I agree with that.
Okay, I am gonna ask that we tighten this up to questions because we have less than an hour until we have to get to a hospital district, and I don't want to cut us off, but we are way over time. Director Demare, then Director Stoner, then Director Pettengill, then Director Birch-Jones.
My question will be quick. Area A was on the rental unit for 25 years, 25 years with no rental unit. I know the rental units currently are in Oldbridge and Braylorn, and we do have people looking for rental units, and the employers are having a hard time, finding rental units for their employees. So I'm just curious why it was zero and why there weren't some numbers there.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it is one of the challenges of the 2021 census, as we were mid-COVID when the census was undertaken. So quite a few of the numbers are actually impacted by that. But according to the 2021 census figures in 2021 in Area A, there were no renters. That's correct, right, Jesse? That's what our analysis was showing. It doesn't mean that they aren't actually there, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a need for them, but the census does not capture them. And so it's hard to quantify them. And that's why when Jesse spoke about rental needs, and maybe this is something we could sort of highlight a little bit or note in the report. But one of the things that we've said is that it represents an absolute bare minimum, but it's hard from a purely statistics point of view to justify saying that you need rental when there are zero renters. However, we also know from the qualitative work that was done that those pressures are there and that the renters aren't there either because of cost or potentially because of the year in which the census was done, and then they may not have been there. So I think we'd be happy to add some caveats around that data, but that was why Jesse noted that it has to be seen as an absolute floor in terms of rental, and probably the demand is higher than what we're showing, but we're just working based on the best information we have.
Thank you.
Director Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. I appreciate the presentation and the work. I'm just curious, Ms. Abraham, you spoke a lot about kind of the limitations of the data in terms of when it was collected and the delay there. And then Mr. Thompson, you spoke to like the projected housing needs in the next 5 to 20 years. So the timeline on this as for the legislative requirement is coming up. The District of Squamish just saw our numbers in council yesterday. And what we saw is that it's actually grossly underestimated. So in Squamish, the estimation is that we need 315 units per year over the next 5 years. We've been building at a rate of 466 dwelling units per year, and we're still in the midst of a housing crisis. And so I'm just curious if we have any sort of like ground truthing with respect to the projections that we're seeing here. Are they like, do we actually think that that's going to be sufficient to address the need?
Yeah,
Or
it's an
strengthening our, sorry, I'll just finish. Do we need to strengthen the language in the section of the report that speaks to data limitations on this really being like a bare minimum so that we know going forward? Just like, I feel like the language in that limitation section is maybe a bit soft.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly look at that. I think that's a good note to have in terms of the District of Squamish. I would say, based on our experience and what we're seeing, it's highly variable how communities are responding to these growth. So again, each of these component Ds is this average of these two different growth scenarios. But even if the District of Squamish were to look at a purely locally driven growth scenario, if you were looking at BC statistics population projections, you might find that those were underestimating the need and demand. And that has to do with how BC Stats allocates sort of population growth across the province, particularly, they're anticipating relatively high growth in the province, but most of it is being directed to large municipalities, which doesn't fully account for the fact that Squamish is very close by and is effectively now, not an extension of Metro Vancouver, but very connected in terms of its housing market and people who commute back and forth. And so the BC Stats figures don't always account for that. And again, I have caution that as municipalities and regional districts move into their OCP planning phases, that it's important to undertake a proper population and a household projection that better estimates true growth, because this component D is not about growth. It's just about ensuring that there is some capacity. I will also note that many communities feel that their numbers are actually high based on this. And those are often communities that have not done a lot of growing in comparison to Squamish, which is seeing quite strong growth over the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, that's helpful. Just in follow up to that, I am curious about the final SLRD numbers. Have they been ground truth with the data that's coming out of the municipalities? So as I see it, over half of that 20-year requirement will be driven through the Squamish numbers. So our number for 20 years is 6,300 units needed. I'm just curious if you folks have had a chance to cross-reference that with the data that's coming out of the municipalities with the numbers that you presented here.
We've not had a chance to do it with the municipalities because that was beyond the scope, but I mean, it would be relatively easy to kind of look and check that things are tabulating relatively evenly across the region.
Director Pattengill, do you have a question?
Yeah, just, so I understand, this is provincial numbers from the provincial model and they require this, but just understanding a bit how this fits in with what numbers we will actually build towards and build into our OCPs and so on. Because as been mentioned, our RGS does sort of direct growth to settlement areas. So I would sort of, on some level, expect the growth identified here to be assumed that as an SLRD, we actually aren't going to deal with much of that. We are going to expect the municipalities to. So when do we sort of understand what the actual sort of goal or objective is?
So thank you through the chair. I can speak to that a little bit. So similar to what we've done in electoral area A, where the OCP is supporting gentle density increases, it's small moves like that as opposed to allowing for a significant amount of growth. Yeah. It's ensuring that the objectives and policies are in the OCPs that will support that if a private landowner comes forward with a proposal to do multifamily in certain areas, and those types of small moves, as opposed to something larger. I don't know if you want to speak to the RGS piece or just the OCPs, but that's typically what it would be, is we have the objectives and policies in the OCPs to support zoning amendment applications that come forward at the individual property owner level.
But just for clarity, like if we get an application and or somewhere in an area, should I say, oh, well, we should approve this because we've got this number that says we need this housing, or should I say, well, no, we actually expect this to happen in a municipality, so we should actually turn this down because we don't want to develop.
Yes, so thank you through the chair. I can speak a little bit to the regional growth strategy again, and we do have really strong language to protect our non-settlement areas. Within the RGS, there are still service communities, there are still what do we call that? The area by Mount Currie there, it's a community designation. So we do have a few areas that have servicing that may have potential for these more gentle density projects. And then we also have our master plan communities. Those are still generally where and how we will see growth in the municipalities. We have added accessory dwelling units, and that was also a recommendation from the last housing need and demand study. And then I think to Director Stoner's comment, we have an opportunity to be working really closely with the member municipalities on what these housing needs reports say, and then how we reflect that in our planning approaches, working with the municipalities to accommodate that growth.
Yeah, I think just through the chair to add on to that, there will be another housing need and demand study produced that's due in 2028. So we have a relatively short time frame before we will be updating again, and could have some opportunities to address that member municipality data in conjunction with the regional district numbers.
Director Birch-Jones, last question.
Thanks. I just read an article about, folks in Japan where they have a more elderly population, even than Area B. And they talk about folks dying alone in their homes, and there's a Japanese term for it about the lonely death, and that sort of struck me. And I was seeing quite a bit of kind of a sad scenario in a lot of, I think this is a very good report. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what it meant in Area B. I'd like to incorporate some of the information into the OCP update. I'll make a motion to that effect. There were a couple of things. There's two references to the population of the First Nations population in Area B being at 7%. And I just want to confirm you're talking about off reserve there? Because I don't see references to some of the multi-unit.
That's correct. And this is actually something we went over with staff. We know that there's a little bit of conflict between what the census is saying and what you may be seeing in other reports. It's based on a 25% sample from the census, which means that they actually take 25% of the population and then they expand their findings to what they assume is 100% based on that. So the numbers aren't always perfect, particularly in smaller communities. So we've talked about that, but it is what the census reflects in terms of off-reserve individuals who identify as Indigenous is how we would classify it.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I just wanted to confirm that. And also the reference to healthcare in Lillooet being noted as an attraction. We might have to tweak that. It's a really good report and has a lot of it's very helpful for planning, and thank you. Thank you for the work. I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you.
Lots of questions. I hope that we see this again and do more work with it. Yeah.
Thank you. So, thank you very much for being here, and for Jesse and Matt for being here to share this with us. We have, I would like someone to make the motion that we receive the study and that we send staff, we refer this back to staff to make appropriate amendments to appropriate documents in our library. Thank you. Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Birch-Jones. Comment, go ahead.
I really appreciated the focus on partnerships with the existing Indigenous communities throughout the region. That was exciting. I think you're right. The Lillooet Main Street is like the kind of thing that to me does reflect agreement with the RGS and the OCP, and it's sort of a bullseye for what I hope we realize. And I agree, it's a solid document. And when these decisions come to me, will be asking similar questions to what Director Pettengill suggests. And I think your response about a Lillooet Main Street is the right spot, to me, will kind of square that kind of debate in myself. So thanks.
All in favor? Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We need a break?
Yeah, Chair, can I follow up just with the motion?
We,
You want a break first?
uh,
I'll ask you about it.
yes. Good. I'd rather bring it forward to another. Yeah. No, I told her it's going to be. Okay, great.
But talk to you.
Yeah, it's fine, yeah. Like 3 minutes. Just to get up and stretch. Please don't leave the room. Don't. We are moving ahead in the agenda now to 9.5. This is a request for decision on the next gen 911. Don't worry about it. We can't hear. It's all good.
It's gonna interrupt my.
Perfect.
thought process.
That's exactly what the doors were. Thank you. Over to you.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Through the chair, I'm here to provide you with context around this request for a decision. The NG 911 program introduces transformative capabilities such as text to 911 and multimedia sharing between callers, dispatchers, and first responders. Next Gen 911 will significantly enhance first responder situational awareness, optimize resource deployment, and ultimately improve public safety. A necessary first step in the NG 911 program is the establishment of the TELUS Local Government Authority, otherwise known as the LGA Agreement, which outlines fundamental roles and responsibilities for government authorities surrounding NG 911 implementation. The TELUS LGA is standardized across Canada, and it details regional district duties related to the hiring of 911 dispatch service providers known as PSAPs, such as ECOM and Surrey Fire Dispatch in BC. It specifies GIS data obligations, including format, structure, and aggregation standards, ensuring compatibility with IP-based technologies. The GIS piece isn't totally relevant until 2027, but the LGA is for a term of 10 years with no financial obligations to the SLRD. To note, aside from the content contained within this request for decision, is a new development where those municipalities within the SLRD that hire their own primary PSAPs require a discrete TELUS LGA, which is now required. And this is a recent development made while protective services staff are finalizing the SLRD TELUS LGA. TELUS is taking ownership of the shortcoming and is already conducting outreach to municipal representatives at the resort municipality of Whistler and the district of Squamish. The Ministry of Public Safety has set a targeted completion date of all TELUS LGAs, January 2025. So unfortunately, time is of the essence in this matter. And that's it for my summary on this request for decision today.
Thank you very much. Questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to, it wasn't clear to me, does TELUS gain any sort of proprietary ownership of the GIS data, or is it, we have to share it with them in a certain format, but it's still our data and we can do whatever else we want with it as well?
It's still our data. TELUS is tasked with being the provincial GIS data aggregator because they're the owner of the infrastructure and the creator of the back-end applications that facilitate NG 911 functionality. And security is one of the key components of NG 911. So your data is still secure in that regard, but TELUS is the primary aggregator for the province of BC.
Okay, and then my second question, just to make sure this doesn't put any sort of new obligations in terms of our own GIS data collection, management, and so on, like it's something we're already doing and it's just sharing what we're already doing, or do we have new timeline obligations and so on?
Couple components there is a Q&A that's published by the Ministry of Public Safety about NG 911, and it has been called out that in a next gen 911 world, there are potential increased staff impacts, meaning there's going to be more work to consider from a GIS team to facilitate NG 911 functionality and compatibility. as we transition to this new world. That's actually called out. And fortunately, there has been funding released. Every local government authority in the province has received 45,000 currently in grant funding from the UBCM to start this journey. And there's more grant opportunities to come. There is an open grant opportunity now for an additional 100,000 that's open till about February, where LGAs can apply for this funding. But it's a really good question, and I think it's fair to assume there might be an incremental increase in staff workload, just generally across the board in your GIS team, supporting NG 911 data in general.
Director Demare, question?
Yes, thank you. On page 7 of the report, line item 4.3.1, electoral A is highlighted. I just wondered why.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Director Demare? We didn't understand you.
Yeah.
787.
Sorry about that. On page 7 of the report, did you hear that?
Yep.
Line item 4.3.1, electoral A is highlighted. Is there a reason for that?
Okay. You're referencing the draft TELUS LGA. There's no specific reference or call out being made in that specific line. I think that's a track change or a note in which all electoral areas A through D need to be captured within that table.
Okay, thank you.
Director Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. Just on the cost recoveries piece, do we have a sense of what like order of magnitude we may be billed for in terms of cost recovery here? And where does that funding come from in the regional district budgets?
It might be important to make a distinction between the TELUS LGA and NextGen 911 and subscription to e-com, call, answer, and dispatching services. In terms of the TELUS LGA, it's a foundational agreement, historically has existed in perpetuity. This particular agreement will exist for 10 years. There's no cost implication to any of us. There is going to be a staff impact. In the case of the SLRD, we're leveraging the allotted grant funding that has been designated to a 911 call center, or sorry, a cost center, to deal with my and the protective services staff impact, staff capacity impact in that regard. And there is additional grant funding available. It's really going to depend on the existing capacity of a governing authority's GIS team and how much work that they have to do to then be next gen ready. And there's a variety of provincial organizations that have been assembled to support GOBC, and the ICI Society are a couple. In terms of the long-term costs, I can't necessarily speak to that. I hope that through the chair, that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
I don't see any more hands, so I would like someone to make the motion as that the CAO be authorized to execute the agreement. Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Mack. Any further comments? All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you both.
The chair, thank you for your time.
Right, we are going back to the beginning of the agenda, to number 5. Agenda. Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Crompton. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We are now, is there any business arising from the minute? None. We're at committee reports. Area B recommendation. Yes, sir. Director Demare, go ahead.
I wanted to pull 5.24
Oh,
from
sorry.
the consent agenda.
5.24 Fire Smart Program Allocation Approval Agreement. So we'll pull that and we can discuss that later. Where do we put that? Under 11, it'll be tomorrow. What?
Thank you.
Motion or anything?
We need a motion to pull it to be discussed. No.
No.
Okay. Director Burke Jones.
Thank you. I had a request on 5.3.1.
We will discuss those under late business. Make those 13.3 and 13.3. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anything else? No. Okay. We are now at 7.1.1, temporary use permit number 77. You have a pre.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So through the chair, Ms. Katerniak will be speaking to these and here to support.
All right, floor is yours, Ms. Katerniak.
Thank you, Chair. And so I'm the planner analyst at the SLRD, and I can provide a brief summary. This is an application to request a 3-year temporary use permit for the use for the purpose soil processing facility and using approximately 1.2 hectares of land. And so this facility is intended to service various construction projects in the.
This isn't working. Anna, just hang on if you can hear us because
Region.
we can't hear you.
Yeah, I can.
Maybe try turning off your video, Ms. Katerniak.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes. You'll have to start again from the beginning, please.
Okay, sorry about that. So the applicant is requesting a 3-year temporary use permit for the purpose of locating a commercial soil processing facility, and that will use approximately 1.2 hectares of land. The facility is intended to service various construction projects in the region, as well as on the subject property itself when the necessary zoning is in place. And so that will be a large-scale residential development in the future. In terms of operations, the facility intends to process and distribute clean materials with the use of bulldozers, excavators, and rock crushers. And so the site is currently not visible from the highway due to vegetation, and the condition of the permit, we're asking that a vegetation screen is maintained. As well as per the EAD resolution, the applicants are being asked for a stormwater runoff plan due to concerns regarding a nearby river and runoff. That is approximately 40 meters away from the proposed siting. And so we're currently waiting on that runoff plan as well as other additional information that was requested. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Questions? Go ahead, Director Rainbow.
Yeah, since the EAD meeting, the proponent has contacted me and asked me some things and, well, given me the information that we asked for, but that's got to come formally. I've met with the Britannia Beach Community Association, who had heard of this and asked me, is that going ahead? And I told them it was on the agenda for today, and they want to know what the hours of operation are. What's the length of this project? Is this a 3-year temporary use permit? Is it anticipated that this will become a permanent industrial site? What are they planning there? And they have asked if we can have a meeting in Britannia to go over some of these issues and to give them an opportunity to comment.
Thank you. So through the chair, it's my understanding that this, the report that's going through to the board is not requesting a decision from the board at this time. The recommendations came through from the EAD committee, but that the application will be brought back to the board once the runoff and stormwater management plans have been received. So that information is still forthcoming. And should the board wish to add additional pieces of information that to direct staff to add to that, that's possible.
So we've received a few pieces of correspondence over the weekend, which were included in the late cover of the agenda. So those correspondence will be forwarded to staff in consideration of the next iteration of this discussion. Any further questions from the community group, I'll come back to you, could be also submitted before that time. Is that correct?
Clarification, the correspondence was for different.
Sorry.
I believe. Yeah, and so through the chair, the notification, the advertisements in particular were not, did not move forward for this application, given the direction of the at the EAD level, so that this hasn't been, the notification hasn't been provided on this specific temporary.
I see, okay. So those questions that Director Rainbow has received from the community, what should he do with them? Other than just having shared them now, they can.
So, yes, thank you. So through the chair, that is the discretion of the board. That could come in the form of a formal resolution, or it could come as the association reaching out to staff.
Okay. Let's come back to, unless you have another question.
No, I was gonna make a motion.
Okay, I gotta get through questions first,
Sure.
because they could inform this direction. Go ahead, Director Pettingill.
Yeah, I guess just given the discussion, I have a number of questions about this that I would need answered. I'm not sure I want to add my list now. Maybe that's best for when this
Yeah.
comes to us.
How do we want to handle this in, what's the ideal way of getting all of these questions?
EADs have put in their specific requirements.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be bad to amend it with specifically in this table. And then the EAD has recommendations to the board, and the board can amend it yes, with their own specific thoughts.
Okay.
So it would be good to expand on that.
Okay.
Yeah, so one, I guess there's anxiety that this is actually to help with the tunnel spoils from the forest pipeline. And so people wanting to understand what is the magnitude, is this something that can handle that? Is this part of that? Are we into dealing with acid rock processing and all that kind of thing? So, what are the requirements there? And then I have the Tiger Bay process has been going on very long. So how do we ensure that we don't sort of approve this in such a way that they can never actually action it for their development, because this expires and they haven't gotten their approval or haven't moved forward yet? So how are these things coordinated? Oh, I'm sorry. My understanding is that there's a whole bunch of questions, if this involves the whole wood fiber project, about planning around spoils and so on, and sort of a lack of information to the community. So the community is going to be really wanting to understand that whole processing piece and trucking and sort of all the things that can go with that, if that's what this really is.
I was curious around the, I know it's quite common, like with a rezone or a TUP, for it to sort of speak to the whole parcel that it exists on. And I know that the mapping shows the subject area, but I'd like to understand what limitations are going to live inside the TUP that will actually stipulate the footprint, just so I understand that it's not like where it is or where it isn't. And that's both for this board and for the public. I think it's there, but without seeing it, I just want to make sure that was highlighted. And I wondered if I'm hearing maybe what I'm hearing from Director Rainbow. I wonder if that's reflected, like, do we do public or requests that proponents do public information meetings on things such as this? And is that an appropriate step that's somewhere in the process? So first bit was just a feedback. The second bit is a question.
Mm-hmm. Through the chair, I'll let Ms. Katerniak speak to the technical aspect of the TUP and location.
Through the chair, yes. So the TUP does specify location. So it is limited to that area outlined on the subject parcel. And I think there was like there was a second question.
Just what role, if any, a public information meeting may hold in this process? Is that something that is common practice, or is that something that the board could consider directing, or like where does that sit?
So we don't typically hold information meetings for TUPs. We haven't in any of the ones that I have worked on. The public process is to notify through advertisements in the newspaper, as well as to notify people within 150-meter radius. So that's our typical public process.
But if that board could decide to require that as part of the process, is there something limiting us from doing that? I just want to make sure that we all understand what options are or are not available to us.
To my knowledge, there's nothing limiting the board as to when they would like to hold a public information meeting.
And I guess my last piece of feedback, as much as sort of yes and to everything that I've heard, is I just wanted to highlight that this might be, as much as the argument that the current allowable extraction activities can produce as much dust that this could, I think, sort of highlights that this may be an opportunity to actually put in some mitigation measures, as we do have residents now in Britannia North that we didn't have prior, and perhaps this is a way to sort of set some standards and on the site more generally through this TUP, use some to talk about. I don't know how much of a concern that is overall, but I can see that we have more folks there that may be concerned about this topic than we have had in the past.
This is very macro. What guides a decision about a TUP? Does this all come out of our guiding documents, or are TUPs less sort of connected to our senior documents? Does that make sense?
What are the guardrails around a TUP versus a?
Well, like, so we just received the housing needs report, and this seems like a bullseye for a place where we could realize a lot of housing. And so I'm inclined to say, no, this is just a bad spot for this use. I prefer housing. But is that the way I should, or am I given that? I guess I just wonder what am I told by our framing documents about this use in this place?
Through the chair, a temporary use permit is meant to supersede the zoning, and so what the zoning currently allows, or the OCP, is not really taking so much into consideration, as it is a temporary use. This use is not meant to replace the future residential development. In fact, they're proposing that this use will be temporarily there, and it will help to facilitate the future residential development.
Sorry, I missed that. How is it going to help?
Thank you, through the chair. So it will provide soil and necessary excavations for the residential development.
Like putting the bell on the lot.
Yeah, okay. So it's intended to supersede the OCP and the RGS. Therefore, it's a special circumstance where you'd use something like this. That's why it's temporary use permit. And so then it's reasonable to not to reject the application. Like, that would be a reasonable decision.
Yes, it is up to the board to make that decision, yes.
Go ahead.
It doesn't seem like it.
I feel like everyone's had their opportunity to ask their questions, so I'm going to Director Rainbow.
I just make a couple of comments first. With relation to our regulations that we inform people within 150 meters. That's maybe Outbound Station Coffee Shop, which is on Tiger Bay property anyway, but it doesn't include the community of Britannic Beach. So because we're not obligated, we don't, and that's partly the motivation from them to say, hey, what's going on? We need to know more. Wood fibre has not been mentioned at all in this, nor Fortis. But one of the questions that a local person came up with was, there was some time ago when the spit was being dismantled in Squamish, could they move some of that fill to Britannia Beach? And the answer was no, because it wasn't cleaned. It was acid rock, you know. So when I raised that at the EAD, to know that it is clean, you know, that's where that was coming from. Are we sure that we're dealing with clean material there? And if we put in a regulation or a requirement that the material is tested and is certified as clean, and if we put in some other requirements about dust mitigation and so on, how do we monitor that? Who is it that is going to go and look and check, and who's going to pay for that? So I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of a TUP for this use. In answer to Director Crompton's comment, before they do any construction there, they're going to need about 3 feet of fill minimum, a meter of fill in the area, because that was dug out too much when it was a gravel pit. So I'm not really opposed to the idea, but I would like to see some more things, some more rules put in there. So could I make a resolution that when staff are answering those questions that were brought up like EAD, that we add to that, what are the hours of operation? What is the estimated length of the project? And how do we monitor the requirements we have with regard to clean fill and dust mitigation, etc., including who pays for it?
Is it fair to say that the discussion here today will be captured in sort of the report back? So all of the questions you've asked will be captured in this.
So I don't need a resolution then?
I think we want a resolution.
Well, that's
Prior to the consideration of the TUP, that the applicant be directed to submit plans that address this and the board discussion today, and they'll bring it back to the future meeting.
Yep.
That capture what we need to have happen here today? Great. Moved by Director Rainbow, second by Director Hopful. Comment? Go ahead.
No, sorry, I've got a motion to statute.
Okay. Call the question. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Go ahead, Director Pat Gill.
Just test that staff instruct the proponent to hold a public information meeting.
I like that. Would anyone like to second that?
Yeah.
Director Rainbow, comments on a public, not a public hearing? It's not a public hearing. It is a public information meeting.
Yeah.
I just suggest that that these answered, like, this be further along before we do that, because public information meetings that don't have at least the proposed solution to these concerns we've seen so far, I think can be problematic. So I'd like to see it happen, but I think the timing is critical, and I trust staff's judgment on that, but I want to be clear that we're not dictating the time that it happens in, but prior to decision by the board. I think it's important.
Heather, and then I'll come to you guys.
I think it might have gotten clarified because my question was specifically, could that motion happen after this report comes back, or understanding that?
I think because the motion's on the floor.
I would.
Just you provided I got clarity on that, but it wouldn't be actioned on immediately.
Mike, and then I'll come back over to you guys.
Just curious if the proponent's running the information session, how are we recording reactions? It's not run by us, making sure that it comes back and it's truthful.
So through the chair, we do, in, typical of a rezoning and other major development applications require the applicants to hold public information meetings. So we have systems to ensure like staff will be attending, and taking minutes and whatnot. So that's a typical process. As Anna mentioned, we haven't done it for TUPs, but we are able to. I've just confirmed in our, board policy that that's possible.
Director Herford, then Director Rainbow.
I think, not just for the public information meeting, but also when it comes back to, as soon as we can start seeing draft permits, I think is helpful. I've gone too far down this path before without having the draft permit to discuss in front of us. I think it'd be helpful, but as always,
Director Rainbow.
I'm just looking at the timing. I mean, is it possible to get this back in front of us by the January meeting? And if it is, I'm thinking we should have the information meeting prior to our board meeting. No? After so if we grant
This
them,
won't, well, this resolution doesn't dictate when this comes back to us. This allows staff to go away and do the work and bring it back when the work is ready. And the work would require the information meeting to be held before final approval. They're
okay,
not gonna bring the approval and then do
No,
the
no,
information
okay.
meeting. That wouldn't really serve anything.
okay, thank you.
Chris, go ahead.
I just want to confirm, it's my assumption that given, I think there's significant local interest, so probably, Squamish Chief as opposed to Peak, or in terms of notifying the public, or I would sort of have some expectation that, it's not just a. So I'm not gonna put it to the resolution, but yeah, just.
I'm calling the question. All in favor? Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
It is 3:00. It's time to start a regional hospital district meeting. Nobody leave yet. Motion to recess this meeting and restart it tomorrow. Seconded by Rainbow. Favor.